দর্শক আমন্ত্রণ জানাচ্ছি চ্যানেল 24 এর নিয়মিত আয়োজন মুখোমুখিতে প্রতি পর্বে আমাদের সাথে কখনো দেশি কখনো বিদেশি অতিথি থাকে। সেই অতিথির সাথে আমরা সুনির্দিষ্ট বিষয়ে কথা বলি। আজকে আমাদের সাথে আছে বাংলাদেশের জাতিসংঘের আবাসিক প্রতিনিধি ও সমন্বয়কারী কুইন লুইস। ওয়েলকাম টু দ্য শো।
Thank you, Murshid. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's been after a year I'm meeting you.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's been maybe more even. Huh?
Right. And by this 1 year, so many things been changed.
Yes, it's been a momentous year in Bangladesh for sure. Yes, a lot of changes.
Right. Let's start with that. So, it's been nearly 6 months that interim government has taken its responsibility and then running the government. Yes, there is ups and downs. And since then, UN is there from the very first time till now to support the government. So, what your observation and how you are supporting this government?
So, I mean, as you said yourself, the UN has been here throughout. So we were here before the new government was in place. So we do a lot of development work, and so that's everything from supporting the government on the cyclones and the floods over the summer that we saw from May to October. So that assistance continued. We're working on education, on social welfare, on health. We're doing a lot of work on the economy, on labour reform. So the UN, as you know, is a very broad group of different organisations and agencies. And so that work continued throughout, and it's still going on. I think probably the big shift is a reprioritisation, really listening to what the government needs. There's been a lot of talk about reforms, and we've been waiting to hear on the outcome and some of the decisions on that. But in the meantime, for example, we recently, it was only last week rather, we had the needs assessment mission that came for the election commission. There was a request from the election commissioner, and so we deployed a technical team to look at helping them. Professor Yunus, when he came in October, requested the High Commissioner for Human Rights to support with the fact-finding mission to look at the events from 15th of July until August, and so we've also deployed a team there. So there's been a range of different support, and really just trying to be there, steadfast, to work with the government, to listen, to hear, and to understand how we can reshift the priority areas of work to advance development in Bangladesh.
As you talked about the reform, are you part of any reform process is going on? Have they asked any thoughts from you? Like there are like 6 different committees.
Yeah, so it's varied dramatically. I mean, these are national committees. They're sovereign committees. The government has put them in place, and they're led by Bangladeshis. But we have been asked, for example, to provide comparative examples from different countries on issues, whether it's on justice or anti-corruption, for example. We've been asked to provide a little bit of training for some commissions, a bit of technical advice. But ultimately, the reforms have really been part of this nationally led process, so not so much.
Right. So one of the major things this government has done that is previously it was denied by the Aomi League government and all other governments. There is no disappearance, enforced disappearance, and they didn't sign the convention. So this government has signed it, and now what's the next step? That's my first question. And what can be done in to get her out of this strain, or people who have been taken away, some of them came back, now they are looking for justice.
So, I mean, we're really encouraged by the government's decision to sign the Convention on Enforced Disappearances. It's a really, really positive step, and it really means that the government is serious. They want to be accountable, and I think addressing enforced disappearances is key. Obviously, there's many families that have been impacted by enforced disappearances, so we have been meeting with them over the years and advocating on their behalf. And now there's the Enforced Disappearances Commission, and I know the government is also supporting that process to bring truth and accountability. So really the next steps are making sure that the convention is implemented, that is looked at in all its components, and we continue to work with the families, not only to reach truth and accountability, but also so we can prevent enforced disappearances in the future. So, I mean, from the UN's perspective, I think it's a really, really positive step.
Right. But if by the election, just a follow-up question, if by the election, what if a new government comes, a political government comes, and they feel like it's a trap for them. If they don't go further, will it have impact on the long run on the image of Bangladesh? Because they signed the convention, but they don't ratify it.
So, I mean, all of these conventions are really only as good as the intention of the people and the governments that are involved and sign them. And I think, again, as I mentioned, there's an incredibly positive intention. And everybody I meet, whether it's political parties, civil society, or government officials, they all say that they don't want to repeat and they want to see change. So I think that change, the momentum is there. Ultimately, at the end of the day,
there's a sense of responsibility.
Sense of responsibility, but at the end of the day, it's the people of Bangladesh who need to hold the government to account. So having these conventions, ultimately ratifying and implementing them, is really helpful because it provides a framework.
Right.
But it's the electorate that needs to speak. Right, and I'm very hopeful for the future.
So needs assessment team is here. I think they met all the parties. There is a question how they made the party who left Bangladesh. Maybe you can share some light on that. And if I remember clearly, in 2018 and 2024, Bangladeshi election was not a mandate in UN, right? Because Bangladesh didn't want even to invite, because they want election to happen like them. But what's your real expectation out of this election? Because there's a new change and people want to vote. You have seen people been participating in the July protest for their rights and their freedom. So, and how UN going to help Bangladesh to get that particularly free, fair, credible and inclusive election?
So we have very, very strict rules on elections.
Okay.
In order to support an election, we need a formal letter from the Election Commission. So we got that, I think, the second day the Election Commissioner was appointed. So we really mobilized to come quickly. And the Secretary General told Professor Yunus he had the full support from the United Nations. So when the request came, we moved very quickly. So the team left last week, and they met with all of the political parties, everyone, and listened to everyone. And what they heard is that everybody wants credible, peaceful, inclusive elections in Bangladesh across the board. And I think that's the feeling in the country, that people want to express themselves and want to really decide who their government is and who they want to see elected during the polls. So for the UN, we are really focused on the technical. It's really about the mechanics. So, can we help with the counting, the door-to-door, the registration that's going on? Does the government need biometrics? Do they need computers? What kind of on-the-job training will be helpful? The Election Commission have done many elections in Bangladesh. They're technically very strong, but I think the focus this year will really be make sure that they're credible and that people can trust. So whatever we can do to make sure that that's happening, to make sure that civil society organizations can monitor and have the tools and understanding to do that, that the public is aware about how to vote and their rights, and to really promote elections where women come to vote, young people come to vote, all communities within Bangladesh express themselves. And then if there's trust, then I think the next government will have a lot of support for any measures that they take, including some of the reforms that will be discussed in the Consensus Commission.
How do you see the changes since July, August in the human rights situation? And as there are obviously challenges, nothing can change overnight. In that case, what's your major observation?
Maybe just to start by saying, I think the Secretary General and the High Commissioner for Human Rights have been raising human rights issues in Bangladesh for a long time. And I think they did so very much before the July-August protests and the killings, and they also raised their voice very loudly during the protests when they saw young people being killed. And I think there's been a very strong message from the government that we're very encouraged by, from Professor Yunus, from all of the advisors, to say we want to change, we want to be a government that respects human rights, and we're going to implement reforms that make sure that we're not going to see enforced disappearances. We're going to respect freedom of expression and freedom of assembly, and that we'll take any measure needed to address the issues, including extrajudicial killing. So I think there's really a very strong sense that they want to make change. We're very, very encouraged by that. We're encouraged by the Commission on Enforced Disappearances, by the efforts to strengthen the Anti-Corruption Commission, by really, you know, taking these issues and addressing them. But as you said yourself, every country in the world needs a continuous effort to maintain and address human rights. So nothing gets fixed overnight, but I think really we're very pleased with the openness and the ability to discuss the issues, and just the very welcome reception that we saw for the High Commissioner for Human Rights. He spoke very openly about the issues that needed to be addressed in Bangladesh, and I think that dialogue has been maintained. And
do you think there is a certain slightly change, either positive or negative? What do you think?
I've seen reforms of the judicial. We've seen some very positive changes. We've seen the families of people of enforced disappearances being able to speak out, to be able to advocate. We've seen the Commission doing a huge amount of work. We've seen the tribunal, the International Criminal Tribunal, really move forward. They took on board some of our comments on the legislation. And you know, so I think there has been changes, and I think they're very positive.
Right. One of the prime area for UN is the Rohingya issue. Now we have a new neighbor. It's just 6 months or yeah, we have a new neighbor, and they're fighting among themselves, and these people are surviving here hardly. So I'm not going to ask you when they start repenting. It's the right moment, but there's a new challenge. So how to tackle this new challenge, the new neighbor?
So first of all, I think I always like to start by saying I think the international community really, really, really appreciate Bangladesh's hospitality. It has to be recognized. I know it's said a lot, but I think when you look around the world, there's not many countries that have opened their doors and who are taking care of 1 million refugees. I know the host community in Cox's Bazar has maintained that hospitality. And so for the UN, it's really important that we can continue to provide assistance and humanitarian support, not only to the Rohingya, but that we really make a concerted effort to support the hosts as well. And I think that's really key for us. At the end of the day, the Rohingya themselves, and everybody wants them to be able to go home, but they want that return to be safe, to be voluntary, to be dignified. And it's very challenging right now in Rakhine because the situation is very insecure, and as you've said yourself, there has been a lot of fighting, and that fighting's continued. But there is a change in dynamics, a change in politics. And so that's really more a political decision about how to engage and how we can move forward. But what I can say is my colleagues in the UN and inside Rakhine and Myanmar continue to provide humanitarian support where they can. And we will continue to do that. And we will continue to advocate for cessation of violence, for all armed groups to respect international humanitarian law. There was a statement made by the Secretary General on that not very long ago. And I know the team in Myanmar are really, really adamant and continue to advocate. But also we have a new special envoy for Myanmar, Ms. Julie Bishop, and she's really been a very strong, I think, and a coherent voice. And we have a lot of hopes for the new chair of ASEAN. So there's some very positive steps that maybe are not in the limelight every day, but I think we're hopeful that we'll see a change.
But there is a new news that is like Donald Trump, the new U.S. president, is going to cut the funds for the aid. Is that going to impact?
So what we do know is that the emergency food assistance, these are global policies. Right? So what we've been told is that the U.S. policy on emergency food assistance hasn't changed, which is very positive. But
there is an overall fund crisis for the... Yeah.
So, I mean, again, so the announcement was that for 90 days programs are suspended. We still don't fully understand all of the ins and outs of what that means. It's a global policy, so we're coordinating and looking at what the implications will be. But obviously, any humanitarian assistance needs to continue to provide the basic food rations for the Rohingya, for basic education so children can go to school, health services, because ultimately we need to make sure that people are equipped for when they go home and so they can rebuild their lives.
Yeah, and they're saying that there will be new influx coming up. Do you think so? No.
So, I mean, that's why my colleagues in Myanmar and in Rakhine are really focused on providing humanitarian support and protecting people and advocating for the cessation of hostilities and for the armed groups to take care of the civilian population. For now, for the moment, we're not seeing very large numbers of people crossing, and so I think, you know, that work needs to continue.
One of the major area which is always we cannot predict on this. It's the natural disasters. Bangladesh is one of those lands where you see either floods or cyclone or anything, and thousands of Bangladeshis are always impacted by this. We also have seen this year. So how UN is really sort of extending its hand of help?
So, I mean, what we saw over the May to October period last year, 2024, was just, it's actually, you know, I have very few words to describe the impact and the suffering we saw. 18 million people in Bangladesh were impacted. It's not just thousands, it's entire communities, districts underwater, and people really, really struggling to rebuild their lives afterwards. Bangladesh is really, really well known for the work you do on early warning. And the Ministry of Disaster Management has been a lead across the world for many years. But I think the big change now in Bangladesh, like many countries, is just the scale and the unpredictability of what we're seeing is just totally new. Whereas before we knew that maybe there would be flooding in Sylhet or there would be a cyclone that might hit the Cox's Bazar, but now we don't know when it's going to hit and we don't know the scale. And the frequency is really, really intense. So what the Ministry of Disaster Management has decided to do is make sure every single person in Bangladesh has access to early warning so that they know what's coming, when it's coming, and that they have access to a shelter, and that we are able to protect, to the extent possible, their families and livelihoods. So we're doing a lot of work with the ministry on that, everything from prediction of storms and flooding to making sure that WhatsApp messages and early warning messages are going out in a systematic way, to training volunteers on the ground. The Bangladeshi Red Crescent is involved, the Federation, all of the UN, all of the NGOs working in Bangladesh. So it's really a concerted effort across the system. And I have to say the leadership of the government has been very strong. In parallel, we're doing what we can on climate adaptation. So we're implementing the National Adaptation Plan. So doing a lot of work with communities to look at different types of crops that could be planted, to strengthen infrastructure so that it doesn't get so badly impacted by the flooding. So doing a lot to prevent. And then the final thing, I think, which has been really, really impactful is what we call anticipatory action. So rather than giving people support after they get impacted by a flood, what we're doing is transferring cash to families so they have it before, so that they can make decisions about transportation, that they can move their livestock, that they can move their belongings, so they're able to better prepare, and that's building up resilience and there's less loss. So we are we had the biggest investment in Bangladesh in anticipatory action that we've had in the world. And it's not just for floods, it's for cyclones, for landslides. So it's really, really a multi-hazard approach. So that's something that we're going to continue to build on, I hope, for the future. And
all this disasters that also have an impact on the economic growth, because Bangladesh is having a bit of economic growth for continuously. I'd like to know how you see this growth, where it's going. And also when we have this unstoppable natural impact, how, you know, how to work on this.
So obviously it has a huge impact on the GDP, and so that's why these resilience programs and adaptation programs are so important. But what we've also seen is, since independence, Bangladesh's economy has continued to grow, and Bangladesh is still on track to be a middle-income country. So that's very positive. It doesn't mean that there aren't still challenges along the way. I know inflation has been really, really tough for people, and food prices have gone up as they have in many countries in the world over the last year. So that needs to be addressed, and I know there's been very positive moves on that front. And we also need to strengthen tax collection because we need more investment in education, skills development, diversification of the economy, moving away from the ready-made garment sector is very strong, but other industries are now needed, and we need new training so young people can qualify for the new jobs that come on the market. So there's a lot to do in terms of jobs, social protection, and really working with the Ministry of Finance and the central bank to continue to strengthen the reforms that they have underway.
Right. So UN is helping Bangladesh to achieve its goals. What do you see the challenges and the opportunities?
So we're in Bangladesh to support the advancement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's really our core mandate. Every country has had its challenges. It's really a difficult time in the world with conflict, with COVID and the food crisis. So it's a challenging time. And what we want to do is accelerate the push on the development goals. I know this is something that Professor Yunus holds very close to his heart, and we really want to continue that work. So right now we're preparing not only to strengthen the work we're doing on the economy, on climate, on addressing gender equality, on education, social welfare, health, but also looking at governance and institutional strengthening, but also to look at areas where we can continue to advance on the Sustainable Development Goals. So the government is working with the UN at the moment on a voluntary national review, which means basically we're looking at all of the indicators, looking at where we've made progress, and then identifying the areas where we need more work and really pushing forward with that work.
Right. My last question would be when the fact-finding mission report will come out and what it will talk about, right? Is it like a mandatory? No, or just to have the real reform and change, it will be a sort of a guiding Bible sort of?
So Professor Yunus requested a fact-finding mission to come, and first we had the visit of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and then he deployed a team.
Yes.
They came to look at what happened in July and August, to look at the root causes, but also to do some work to better understand the events and to look at accountability. So that is a very independent process. They were a team of experts that came and they met with all the government officials, they met with families across Bangladesh. So that report should be reviewed by the government in the next few weeks, and we're hopeful that it will be then issued by middle of February. I'm not privy to these reports. It really is a private, a confidential process. But I hope it will be helpful for the truth and the accountability that Bangladesh and its people have been calling for so strongly.
Right. Thank you so much for being in the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Murshid. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. দর্শক, আমরা কথা বলছিলাম জাতিসংঘে বাংলাদেশের সব কাজ নিয়ে। ফ্যাক্ট ফাইন্ডিং মিশন খুব দ্রুত হয়তো তার রিপোর্ট প্রকাশ করবে এবং সত্য এবং ন্যায় বিচার প্রতিষ্ঠায় এই রিপোর্ট সামনে বাংলাদেশকে গাইড করবে বলে তিনি প্রত্যাশা করেন। দেখা হবে মুখোমুখির অন্য কোনো পর্বে। তার আগ পর্যন্ত ভালো থাকুন, সুস্থ থাকুন।